Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Hamblett, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings Magazine with the U.S. Naval Institute. Welcome to the first panel discussion of West. This panel is titled Needle Gun on the Roof.
Taking shots already.
It's like being on the O3 level of a carrier, right? What are the major naval warfare communities doing to restore readiness and build a more lethal force? Before we get started, I want to thank and recognize General Dynamics for sponsoring this morning's session. They're recognized here today by Lee Palmer, Executive Vice President of General Dynamics Information Technology Defense Group. As you know, we cannot hold these events without the support of our sponsors, so thank you to General Dynamics for helping us sponsor this important discussion. I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for this morning's panel, Vice Admiral Retired Jim Zortman. Admiral Zortman is a 1973 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, a career naval aviator. He commanded Medium Attack Weapons School Pacific, Attack Squadron 52, Carrier Air Wing 17, Carrier Group 7, the USS John C. Stennis Strike Group in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. His final assignment on active duty was as Commander Naval Air Forces, or the Air Boss, here in San Diego. Admiral Zortman is a leader who understands being on both sides of the provider and user sides of readiness and lethality, which makes him a great candidate to be our panel moderator today. So Admiral Zortman, over to you.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that, and we're gonna get right into things. There's a number of you out there in the audience that sit in these things, have sat on these things, so it's a well-informed and I think an active group. This is a great panel, I think, to kick off the West Conference this year. For those of you that heard CNO, he made a motion and it carried nearly unanimously to get past thinking about lethality and thinking about improving readiness to what are we doing. And we were a little bit ahead of CNO. We spent some time talking to each other over the last week or so, and that was exactly the tack that we decided to take. We're going to do a little bit different here. We're not going to spend a lot of time introducing everybody that's up here. You know who these people are, and if you don't, somebody probably within a foot or two of you does. They're the type commanders and the leaders of the aviation, the surface, the subsurface, the information, the special warfare communities. They represent research, and they represent all of the things that are done to prepare forces to be ready to fight today, to be ready to fight 6 or 18 months from now. They are going to talk about what they are doing today to make the force more lethal, more ready, and what that's going to lead into is a session a little bit later on this afternoon where you're going to hear the fleet commanders talk about how they take those forces that these warfare commanders are sending them, and then they position them, they maneuver them, they put them in the right posture, and how they're going to fight them as bigger units. So what we agreed to do is, rather than each of them giving an opening statement, we're going to go right into questions. And what we're going to do is ask a question to each of them, and then ask any of the other panel members that want to add on to that or challenge any of the things that they said. And as we go through that, you'll see microphones throughout the audience here, and that's the audience participation part of this thing. We can wait till the end, but if you got a question or an area that you think we need to address right up front, then let's get that on the table so we don't run out of time and lose it. So with that, in a lot of ways, when we start down in an operation or a fight someplace, we expect that we're going to do a lot of battle space preparation. And part of that battle space preparation is often done by the Naval Special Warfare community. So I'm going to throw the first question down to them. And they've been involved in a continuous high-end fight for going on 20 years, and you can make the argument even before that. So with that, Admiral Green, what is it that special warfare is doing to continue in that fight, and the innovation and the other things that are required to get to the lethality and the kind of readiness that's going to be really required for this bigger high-end fight.
Well, thanks. Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks for making me go first. No, but we're, you know, as I look at what the CNO said and what the strategic environment is and what the direction is, we've really got to balance kind of how we're evolving. We can't forget the CVEO fight. We've been in that fight for 17 years and have learned a lot and paid a lot. But where I'm going is trying to develop an NSW our nation needs or expects with the new strategic environment and the direction and a return of great power competition and dealing with rogue regimes like DPRK and Iran. So as NSW, we've really had an evolution since 1940 where every 20 years we've had to evolve or adapt again to a force our nation needs. So a lot of what we're trying to do, we've got a sense of urgency, we've got to be bold, we've got to play chess versus checkers. So the how that we're getting there is what we're calling force optimization, and that's really a realignment of our force from what I'll call from headquarters to edge. And how we're evolving to kind of meet and be a good partner with the Navy, but also our joint and our soft responsibilities. And really that's three things we're doing. It's really kind of a return to basics at the headquarters level. We've invested heavily in an innovation directorate, and we've returned to what is called our 5. We do a lot of wargaming and experimentation. And really that's kind of, I'll call it a whiteboard session, where we're leveraging creative problem solvers to develop soft options to support that great power competition or to continue, again, I would call the CVEO piece is probably, it's more like crime. It's steady state. It's a new normal. It's not going away, so we got to kind of deal with that. At the group levels, which is our 06 levels, we're developing 06 task forces that can swing and support unpredictably and flexibly steady state campaign, contingency, and then, as we've all talked about, hopefully not if and when, but O-plan development. So we've got to train, certify, and exercise 06 task forces to do that. The other thing we're doing is we're merging our surface combatant and undersea commands into a mobility operations group. And we see a lot of synergy with resourcing and acquisition and innovation in partnership with the Navy to kind of expand that. And then down at the Echelon 4, the SEAL teams, we're trying to expand SEAL capacity. We're going to stand up a new SDV team and a dry combat submersible, again, that will provide a lot of capability in partnership with the Navy. But I've just promulgated a vision. It's called Vision 2030, and it's really about strengthen, compete, and reform. And really the strengthen piece is the essence of our community has always been creative problem solvers with a bias for action, call it thoughtful ruthlessness, but guys that move into the space in calculated risks and uncertainty. And it's really kind of cultivating that in our new strategic environment to do things. I think our value proposition is really we can support the high end, but it's really short of armed conflict, irregular warfare, phase 0, gray zone. I think a lot of what we're working on right now with the Navy is how do we create dilemmas, disrupt, degrade, to support other elements of our national power as we try to compete, which is a continuum. So I'll leave it at that. But really our value proposition as we move forward, we can't take our eye off the CVO piece, but we've got to kind of adapt and evolve in partnership, and we've got a great partnership with the Navy to kind of do those things short of armed conflict that will contribute to that competition piece with great powers.
Thanks. Admiral Caudle, you're the commander of the submarine force in the Pacific, and we've got a rich tradition of the fight in the Pacific. As you look at what you're doing today, if maybe one of the most famous submariners from World War II, Admiral Lockwood, would to come back and sit down and ask you and say, what are you doing to have this force be as lethal and as ultimately effective as the submarine force was in the Pacific in World War II? how would you answer him?
Well, I think you would first say, hey, Daryl, didn't you get the memo on the correct uniform to wear? But no, I got some other speaking engagements that I'm going to right after this. But, you know, I think he'd be pretty pleased. And one of the things that we learned coming out of World War II in the submarine force is really, no kidding, being ready day one. And we talk a lot about it, but in the submarine force, we feel a tremendous burden on us to make sure that when any O plan is executed, at the heart of that, who is tenderizing the battlefield out there in the maritime, is going to be a significant submarine force that's ready and highly capable. So it takes a lot to do that. We deliver about 10 to 12 submarines around the world, SSNs, 24/7, 365, 5 SSBNs on deterrent patrols, 365, and it takes quite an infrastructure to pull that off. As we have shifted a little bit in the last couple years toward trying to strike the balance, as Collin talked about, by the way, who we have a great relationship with our soft friends, to getting the balance right between peacetime missions, which have traditionally been ISR focused, toward combat readiness. And we've done a lot of things to do that. And I'll just go through a few of those very quickly. First, we want to expand well beyond ADCAP and TLAM. So when it comes down to it, you know, the CNO talked today about the blurry line of the different phases of conflict, but eventually they all go kinetic. And when you seize the initiative part of that, I want everyone in the room here to be thinking about the submarine force. We are going to be the force that is going to seize the initiative right. And so we are bridging a gap to our maritime strike Tomahawk in the interim with bringing Harpoon back. And so we decommissioned that system about a decade and a half ago, and we made a decision that we still needed a little bit more standoff capability. So we tasked our technical community to build a system to bridge that into our combat control system, and we actually did a successful launch of Harpoon during RIMPAC. And so you're going to see us use these 120 Harpoons we have left and get those on our ship to kind of bridge that. We're still in a very robust spiral development, continuous improvement of our combat control systems, so that's how we're kind of handling that piece. We are singularly focused on making sure that everything we do to build our people is about combat. And to that end, I think we have a pretty good submarine command course. In fact, I would say it's the gold standard of how to build a combat-ready commander. So we have shifted that, those underway periods to be high-end combat operations. Instead of doing a lot of peacetime, shallow water, high contact density, kind of ISR stuff, it's all about combat and delivering violent effects. We have changed the name of our tactical readiness evaluation to combat readiness evaluation. And while that seems like just a name change, the whole focus of that examination has changed. So when you complete that exam, you are combat surge ready. And then the last one is we've developed a CO and EXO curriculum to try to make that level of command smart on our O plans. If you've worked in the business of operational plans, you know they're highly classified, typically ACCMs, hard to get a hold of, and it's hard for that 05 commander to really understand what is it I'm exactly going to do if we actually kick one of those off. So we're trying to bridge that gap. The third piece is our interoperability with allies. Last year, I kicked off a submarine commanders conference where we actually got a bunch of folks in the room at my level, the respective commanders of their submarine forces, for the first time that's ever been done. And a lot of these folks don't necessarily like each other. And so, but when you start talking about the mission and about delivering combat effects, we all have a lot of things in common, and so we're able to do that. And the second one is going to be in April, where we're going to bring those folks again in. And I tend to put it in Hawaii, which doesn't bother anyone, and I tie it to my submarine ball, which they enjoy as well. But we improved our participation in our SEC, our submarine commanders course, by bringing in some of those countries like Japan and Australia into that. In fact, right now, one of the reasons I'm in Blues is the Asian Pacific Submarine Conference is going on with 15 international partners at my level again, talking about the undersea and submarine rescue. And we just completed Exercise Gray Lady, which we actually had the opportunity in our static range at our noise facility up in CFAC to actually mate our undersea rescue capability to an actual Virginia-class submarine, the first time we've actually proven that that capability exists. And the last thing is just very robust tactical development. we are fielding so many things in the submarine force that are autonomous, things that we can launch out of every opening in that submarine. And to command and control that and learn how to employ that effectively in the combat environment is a big piece of that. And we're pushing that down to the squadron level and letting these commanders at the major commander level figure out this and being kind of an expanded brain trust of how to go after that. Seabed warfare is a big piece of that, so you're going to see a huge initiative coming from the undersea on how we actually develop target sets and understand how we can actually fight in the seabed warfare of that part of our domain as well. So that kind of wraps it, sir.
Okay. Admiral Brown, there's an environment that naval forces have always operated in information, and it's how to move the right information, communicate it when it don't get it lost in a stovepipe. The stand-up of the information warfare community and the information warfare commander has been hotly argued in a lot of corners. So could you tell us a little bit about what information warfare is doing to make the force more lethal and more ready?
Right. Thanks. Can you hear me? It's way over there. Point it this way. I'll hit two highlights for what we're doing across the information warfare enterprise. One will be about readiness, which really will span the entire front. C5I readiness will span the front row here. And the second piece will be about how we're building capability into our force that we're putting afloat and forward and how we're leveraging that piece. The first thing I'll talk about is we've recently stood up an information warfare enterprise, which all the folks up here are part of, in addition to all the systems commands and all the PEOs that involve the IW platform. When you think about the information warfare platform, which has to span cyber, SIGINT, intelligence, meteorology and oceanography, it's the backbone network, it's the tactical data links, and you think about that holistically and trying to create a continuum. It spans from shore, it spans to sea, it's the human element, it's the machine element, it's the spectral element, and it's the data element. And that's kind of an unwieldy thing that we're trying to get our hands around. We created an information warfare enterprise to try to handle that with focus in several areas, and one of them is improving the readiness of C5I afloat during the OFRP. And so, partnering with my fellow TICOMs, we've just kicked off this wholeness campaign, which has three focus areas. One's kind of getting after the current operational availability and readiness of the systems we have today. That's primarily being led by our FRD partners at SPAWAR, but we're moving out and trying to figure out how we align to the various maintenance and modernization plans to keep those on track and aligned with the resource sponsor and the PEOs. A second area we're working on is in what would be considered like the design area or the wholeness and capability, partnering heavy with SPAWAR and PEO C4I on that. It's about the design element of the equipment we have out there, how we spare to it, how we do maintenance against it, and some of these other things that have not been normalized, I think, in the C4I arena completely. And in that vein as well, we're reaching out across into the PEO, IWS, and NAVC arenas to try to link the combat system side more tightly to the C4I side, because it really is a single continuum from battle space awareness to targeting. And lastly, we're trying to get our processes together and understand the C2 of how we generate IW readiness. I tell you, at any given point, there's about 57,000 information warriors out there that we count. I have under my domain only about 19,000 of them, so the remainder of them are in these gentlemen's areas for man, train, and equip, as well as the joint force. So I have to be able to kind of leverage that. So we're going after that in a big way, working through this process that we're calling the C5I wholeness, and I'll be happy to take more questions on there. The second thing that we're doing with regard to developing lethality in the fleet is really centered around the information warfare commander afloat concept. We've been after that for a couple years, solidifying how we are generating those information warfare commanders afloat. And today, I think the very last, I would call legacy IWC, which was really the N6 on board, an IP officer. The rest of them are all now screened officers who've gone through 100-day training tracks and tailored to their backgrounds. They represent every specialty in the information warfare community. So oceanographers out there, I have intelligence officers out there, IPs and CWs, standing those. As I've been following the backside of all the post-deployment briefs, most recently I got one from Admiral Gene Black coming back off Arias Truman and kind of the first dynamic force employment. To a T, every commander's coming back and basically talking about how that capability that we're generating out there is really bringing together and harnessing the facets of the information warfare community in a way that we haven't been able to do before, and providing them the maneuver space and the posturing that they need for the high-end fight from port to forward deployed areas. And so we're really getting after that.
So General Wortman, Admiral Lockwood left the room, and General Smith and General Vandergrift showed up, and they said, okay, here we are, a number of years later, you're running the warfighting lab, you're the assistant for naval research, and they ask you the question, what is it that you're doing in the Marine Corps today to be more lethal and ready than they were when they were fighting it out on Saipan and Guadalcanal?
Yes, sir. Appreciate the question. Again, appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'd emphasize just a couple of points, sir, and really kind of reinforcing Admiral Green and Admiral Caudle. Mindset and focus matters an awful lot. So Secretary Mattis, National Defense Strategy, said, hey, we're back in the business of great power competition. We've got high-end adversaries, and we have to respect their capabilities. So to focus our readiness, to focus our lethality efforts in that direction is a critical element of providing the right kind of capabilities for the joint force. So the Commandant in the Marine operating concept cited a couple of things that we think are particularly important. The first is increasingly contested maritime domains. And because we have this expectation that the maritime domains are going to be contested, he said we've got to be completely integrated with the Navy. So we're back in a big way to the business of applying Fleet Marine forces in support of sea control campaigns, in support of maritime operations. And for us, what that means is we want to be able to provide to the fleet, to the assets afloat, to the entire naval force, the ability to do what is often described as distributed and cooperative sensing, fires, command and control, and in information warfare. So for all the type commanders and all the warfare specialties that are represented here, we want to be able to sense the environment for them, and we want to be able to benefit from the sensing that they're doing. We want to be able to shoot for them in a third-party cooperative manner, or we want to be able to have them, put them in a position where they can take a shot off of our sensors. We want to be able to apply information warfare capabilities in a manner that benefits their survivability. And we want to have command and control, naval command and control capabilities in the right places to extend the reach of our fleet commanders and their composite warfare commanders. So this business of orientation and mindset is kind of a critically important component of that. To set the foundation for that, we're really focused on our service level training exercises, and then the exercises that are being executed by our Marine Expeditionary Forces and the numbered fleets. As it relates to our service level training exercises, the Commandant has us in the business in a big way of fighting against capable adversary forces. Adversary forces that have electronic warfare tools, cyber tools, sophisticated intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, and sophisticated strike capabilities. And we know that if we're going to get in the ring with a prize fighter, we've got to have a capable sparring partner. And then our Marine Expeditionary Forces and our numbered fleets are back to the business of fleet and MEF level exercises and experimentation, thinking about applying their capabilities in an integrated manner that provides maximum benefit across the entire naval service. The Commandant has established MEF information groups, so has pioneered the development of information warfare capabilities in the Marine Corps, and that's all about being able to sense the environment, benefit from sensing that's going on across the joint force, to be able to maintain our networks under real pressure, and then to be able to provide the right kind of command and control tools to the naval force that our commanders and our small unit leaders can fight from. There's a significant maintenance component to it, perhaps not the sexy end of warfighting readiness, but a concerted, enduring investment to drive down our not mission-capable maintenance, not mission-capable supply rates. It's really paying off for the Marine Corps in important ways. Would emphasize the point that people matter a lot, so bringing the right kind of talent in the front door and then training and educating them, giving them the right kind of critical thinking and analytical skills, and then conditioning them to operate with high levels of initiative in a really aggressive manner that is influenced and shaped by higher headquarters intent. At the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, we're a little bit more future-oriented, but we're in the business as a naval team of developing the right kind of capabilities and concepts for the future fight, putting them out on a game board for wargaming, and then taking them into to live force experimentation. And if we get that right on the front end, we're not talking stuff that's out there way beyond the horizon. Just a couple years, we'll field capability that are really going to challenge the adversaries that are identified in the National Defense Strategy. So we're excited about where we are, and we're also excited about where we're going as a naval team as we look to the near future.
So, Air Boss, Naval Aviation's been recapitalizing a lot of the force over the last 5 to 10 years. With the charge of lethality and readiness, can you talk about how that recapitalized force is being put together and some concrete examples of how it's more ready and more lethal than it was 5 years ago?
You bet. First off, I think what you're going to see is an awful lot of similarities between all the panelists. As force generators, our job is to man, train, and equip deployable combat-ready forces that win in combat. And that whole vision and what aligns us, as General Wortman just talked about, is that national defense strategy that said, hey, let's get more lethal and let's be ready for that high-end fight. And so you're going to see the activities that we're doing to prepare for that are going to be very similar in nature. So for us in naval aviation, what we really have been working on recently is developing our plan. And when you say a plan, it should be easy, but it's getting alignment throughout the entire naval aviation enterprise to execute a plan that generates 80% of the airplanes that we own that are mission capable and ready to fight and win. So to do that, we've been undergoing an awful lot of reform. And we're reforming across the board. We're reforming, and we're calling this new reform effort, if we will, the Naval Sustainment Strategy. So that strategy will allow us to be able to not only sustain the aircraft we have as we recapitalize, sustain the newly recapitalized aircraft, but be able to do that at a rate that's at 80% of the aircraft that we own. The plan also involves alignment and governance. So we have to realign ourselves with respect to governance, and we're doing that with pillars and pillar leads, and I'll get a little bit more into that. And then we're underpinning all of our reform efforts with big data analytics so that we're actually working in truth and we're being predictive in the steps that we're taking to be able to improve our readiness. So our pillars are taking some best practices from commercial industry with surge, as far as how do we maximize the airplanes that we have to get some quick wins to get airplanes that are up and flying. Reform within our squadrons, everything from the way we're indoctrinating our sailors when they first report aboard to how we provide ready, relevant learning through them throughout their entire tour in their squadrons, through the way we maintain our airplanes at our AIMDs and at our depots, and we're seeing significant improvements recently with those reform efforts. Also improving the way we do our supply chain and how we're repairing repairables, broken parts, and how we're buying our new parts for the airplanes that we have. And then engineering reform as well, everything from reliability control boards that get into our components to how we're responding and providing engineering support throughout the force. So all of these efforts comprise our plan. Our activities are aligned to that plan, and then we hold ourselves accountable to that plan. With respect to recapitalization, interesting, just walking the floor today, you can see examples of that recapitalization with an awful lot of new metal, with P8s replacing our P3s, with continuing to upgrade our MH-60s and our F-18 series F-35s, with VFA 147 just becoming safe for flight, our very first F-35C squadron, and that'll be joining our air wings very soon. To go back to the lethality piece, then all those tactics as we bring 5th gen and 4th gen together, if you will, we kind of commonly call to that as Gen 9 air wings that we're going to be having soon, those tactics, techniques, and procedures to make and maximize the lethality within our air wings. The Growler continues to evolve and add into that lethality. And then, of course, adding our unmanned aircraft with MQ-25 onto our flight decks, as well as Triton, which will EOC later this year. So everything from the other TICOMs I'm talking about as far as maximizing what we have today, recapitalizing for the future, training our sailors and our aviators and our warfighters to be able to better fight, and then the integrated nature with which we fight gets into how we all work together to increase our lethality in the future.
Admiral Boxall, you've here pinch hitting for Admiral Brown, and so you bring a different perspective in that you're coming from Washington. I'm going to ask you to take your Washington hat off and talk about what the surface force, in the lessons they've learned, and how they're applying them for a more ready force today based on some of the challenges you've had to face over the last year.
Roger, thank you, sir. And also thank you for letting me go last, and also for sitting in the straddle seat here between the two tables. That's awesome. But
it's the world you live in. So
it really is. It's symbolic, isn't it? And actually it is, whether you're in Washington or whether you're in the waterfront in Norfolk or San Diego or Japan, we do have a very clear direction in both the Navy, the nation needs, which is really more my lane, and that future force of generation of capability and capacity, and then the Navy, the nation has, and how we're taking what we have in execution in the next year to two to try to get what we can out there and change the way we're doing business to get after. I was also wondering which World War II admiral you were going to make me talk about, but I appreciate you not doing that.
It's actually Scott who taught the cruisers how to shoot, but that's over to you.
Fair. So I can talk ad nauseum about the things we're bringing on for future capability, and I will do that. But I think really, in the interest of readiness, there's future and current. And looking at current, if any of you have heard Admiral Brown speak in the last, not this Admiral Brown, but Vice Admiral Brown, the surface guy, he's talked about this culture of compliance versus a culture of excellence. And you can say that all day long. You can say, oh, well, I want to be I want to have excellence over compliance. Who doesn't want that? But really the things that drive how you get to a culture of excellence is really what is changing in the near term, and I would argue is already in progress. And so a couple examples. What are we doing today? I mean, obviously we know we've had the accidents that happened a couple years ago have now, we've done a lot of soul searching. There have been a lot of money, over $1 billion in things that will get out there very quickly, improvements to radars, training, fidelity. But I think that kind of pales in comparison to really the sea change we've had in returning back to basics, as someone, I think Daryl talked about. This is something that I think has gotten everyone's attention. As you look at the great power competition and this kind of slap in the face of we've got to do more and better with what we have to get after improving our capability as best we can today. We can't wait to do it as this new capability comes out. And so what are we doing there? Well, certainly immediately we have looked very closely at the things we've improved in navigation and seamanship. The fidelity of trainers, not just what we have out there. What we have is what we're going to have for a little while till we make those improvements. But the types of scenarios that we're doing. And so that's one side on the navigation seamanship. But if you look at the readiness out there and how we're going out to COM2Xs, what are those commanding officers doing today, and what will they be doing in the next few months? There's been an overhaul of our Surface Forces Readiness Training Manual, which really is that document that drives what you need to accomplish before you take your forces forward. And we have been a compliant force. We've we've learned through, mistakes we've made or things we've wanted to achieve, or we just our own assessment of what we need to improve on. And we've created a constantly changing document that every other Surf 4 that's in here has done the same thing. But right now we've pushed that to say, hey, maybe we've done too much of dot by dot, you have to do this before you do that, and then you do that, and it gets very rote and very, probably it gets watered down because the desire is I just got to check those things off the block. Vice the shift now, which is more, hey, I have to go make my forces as best I can, and taking that same readiness preparation group, the afloat training groups out there, and say, how do I make them less assessors and more trainers? So those commanding officers can assess their ships and say, this is what I need to do. And let's focus them on the time that they have at sea, rather than say you have this many weeks of training to accomplish all your objectives. Say, here's the things you have to do, and give you more time to exercise your right as the commanding officer to tell us what you think you need to get better at. And by the way, we need to put more trust and leadership into your support networks of training and across the board. So we're still working through that. The Surface Force Training Manual has just come out. We start with the first 2 ships that will go through that, and we expect to see a lot of time returned back to the commanding officers, not just to get back home and stay at sea less, but to use the remaining amount of time that we POM for to go do the things that we think will make them much better. And I think that's very similar to how we would do it back in World War II, to say, hey, no one was telling those COs what to do and that they had to do all these things. We were throwing everything we could at them to say, what do you need, what we can support you with, and you shift that mindset. So to me, in the current readiness side, Admiral Brown is not here, but I guarantee you he would tell you about the culture of excellence that we have to create, and it starts by putting the commanding officer at the center of the problem again and make all those support networks back to giving him or her those assets they need to succeed.
Okay, I'm going to, if anybody wants to line up at the microphones, we'll be happy to start taking that. I'm going to put a question out here, and this isn't directed at any specific person, but I'd ask that we get a couple answers to it. Force has been under a lot of stress in how we've run the force. Deployment schedules, back-to-back deployments dependent on the platform and the particular warfare unit. As we talk about a lethal and ready force in a high-end fight, invite anybody to comment on what is being done to stress the force at a unit level under personal conditions. In other words, when the hole gets blown in the side of the ship, when the electronic hole gets blown in the network, when the conditions are physically and mentally challenging at a level that we don't necessarily see in the kind of ops that we're doing today. There's always exceptions to that, but are there significant changes being made in the way that we're preparing and then training at the level that you're working at to address that kind of a scenario? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll kick it off. That is one of the toughest things to do, is how to create a tough and resilient sailor that knows how to handle the eventuality of taking a round, the eventuality of having a main space fire or flooding in one of our ships or aircraft, how to not be in the fetal position in the corner when that event occurs, but man your panel and work through that. So how do you do that in peacetime? It is a challenge. So the way we're taking that on, at least in the submarine force, and I think most of the team up here would probably have similar stories, is condition our sailors and officers through the lens of warfighting and combat in every single thing we do. That's the lens by which we want to view all of our missions. And hopefully by doing that, you'll kind of asymptotically approach this toughness that's needed in combat. You can't guarantee it, but I think it's the only way you can go about it. So this is how we train. This is the scenarios we're at sea doing. This is how we're actually demonstrating what the adversary looks like. This is robust red teaming. This is simulating the conditions by which we're going to actually be in combat. And it's making all of the peacetime missions viewed in and through the lens of warfighting. And by doing that, we hope we're building tough and resilient sailors.
I'm going to hop in too. For anybody here, I imagine a lot of you have read Jim Hornfisher's books, Fleet at Flood Tide, Neptune's Inferno, etc. And I got to tell you that I think when I read those, that's probably the first time that I really kind of thought about the absolute gore that is war, whether you're ashore or at sea, but certainly at sea, for me as a commanding officer of a ship and thinking about the types of things my crew had to endure in a daily, day-to-day. And so to me, there's two sides of this. You can't automatically say to your crew, hey, we need to go practice how bloody and gory that's going to be, because it is. But I think you can talk about understanding how you expect those crews to react and training them for that very real eventuality that happens either whether you're at war or in peacetime in an accident. We need to talk about that, because there are very real and understood reactions that happen that we need to all have a sense of what the impact of that's going to be on your readiness to fight. We are doing those things. We're doing those things at Surface Warfare Officer School. We're doing it at boot camp. But at the, really, I'll be interested to see how this. We just kind of shifted back to this, this recommitment to that warfighting aspect from a resilience and toughness standpoint. You've heard the CNO talk about it. When you start getting down to the detail of it, it is very, very tough. It's tough to go through. We're teaching our commanding officers how to get through training at SWAS in conditions that I didn't have to go through in training, which were going to be in sleep-deprived conditions. They're going to be through stressful conditions of a lot of things happening at once, like it will happen when it happens for real. Is it going to mimic exactly what they'll see? Probably not. Will it give us an opportunity to understand that we will see huge differences in performance and that expectation, and to be prepared for those things? I think the answer is absolutely yes. As we go down this path, I think it will get better. I think we will get better with the ability to simulate some things, but you can't simulate death and destruction. So there's pieces to this that I think we do have our crew's attention. The MCPON has moved to a very proactive strategy with the chief's messes, and he wants them to be prepared at the deck plate level, taking lessons learned from both recent examples and World War II examples.
Just to pile on just a little bit, Ron, not to have much to add to that, but there's a saying that says your performance in combat never raises to the level of your expectation, it always falls to the level of your training. And I think, we've seen that play itself out over and over and over. So to the point of realistic training, to the point that National Defense Strategy says, high-end fight, let's prepare. It does involve that leader development, it involves the sailor development, it involves the mental discussions that we're having with our sailors on a daily basis, with our leaders, and that's all folded into leader development strategy that every single one of us has in every single one of our communities, and I think you'll see great alignment along that.
Okay. Let's take a question from the floor.
Hi, Justin Katz, Inside Defense. Admiral Caudle, if I could single you out, I'm sorry. You briefly hit on the fact that the Navy is going to start recertifying the harpoons for the SSN 668 class as kind of a bridge for whatever the next Tomahawk is going to look like. Could you lay out a little bit more on that in terms of what the way forward is? I guess specifically, are there plans to start re-exercising that capability once you've worked out the recertification with Boeing? And also, at least from the media perspective, it's not clear when that next Tomahawk is going to start taking form. So how long do you expect this bridge to last? Thank you.
That's, to the time period on the bridge, I expect that to be, in the 5-year kind of time frame. So that's the kind of numbers we're talking about. Integrating this capability seamlessly into our combat control system, which now is kind of a standalone capability that we had to do kind of as a one-of to make sure we could communicate to the weapon, take off-hole targeting, and actually execute that mission through the harpoon system, was kind of a demonstration that's now going to go into the production in our next combat control spiral development. So you'll see that kind of being rolled out in our normal time frame that we do that. So we do about 7 submarines, 5 to 7 submarines a year. If I had to, I could put the temporary system on any of the 688 combat control systems and field that quicker. But that's the kind of rollout plan that I think you'll see. the mix in the torpedo room, which is obviously we're always trying to get that balance right of what we've got in our torpedo room between ADCAP torpedoes, berthing modules, and other special equipment that we're doing for special missions, and now Harpoon being brought into the mix. That's going to be a delicate balance based on what the mission planning is and the expectation of the respective COCOM and where that submarine's being deployed. So, but that's hopefully gives you a sense of that. So I'm expecting to see that kind of kicking off in the next year, and we're talking maybe about 5 to 7 submarines will get that in their next spiral development, the capability to shoot Harpoon.
Sure, if I might just pick up on that, I wanted to highlight, the Commandant has been pushing us very hard in this business of long-range precision fires, and certainly maritime fires are a really important component of that. So talked in opening remarks about, the Marine Corps operating as a fleet marine force in support of assets at sea, wanting to be able to cooperatively deliver fires in support of sea control. A couple of the key components that the Commandant is pushing us on. First is the pursuit of a long-range advanced anti-ship missile. He is an impatient man, a man of many positive qualities, but so we're talking a relatively near-term capability that we're making a significant investment in now. The second is the ability to apply loitering munitions, multi-mission, multi-payload, that kind of expand some options for combined arms, what we would describe as combined arms effects against a target. And then the third is aviation delivered ordnance. And F-35 opens up some really interesting and valuable space, we think, for the naval force, and the F-35C in particular, because of its enhanced payload and some of the unique weapons that it's able to apply that are a little bit different than what the B offers. But in the same manner that the submarine forces wants to expand its range of options, we're thinking about Marine Air Ground Task Forces from land-based locations able to support those kinds of requirements as well.
Admiral Daly, you have a question.
Well, thank you, Admiral Zortman. On behalf of the Naval Institute and FCA, we thank the panel. A quick question. When you look back at what we've been doing, a fairly permissive environment. If you were a Marine fighting in the streets in Fallujah, you didn't think it was too permissive, but those Marines didn't have to deal with a lack of air cover or control of the logistics that supported them. On the Navy side, we sent P3s over land to use their EO/IR capability and lost perishable ASW skills. There's examples like that in the air-to-air skills on the aviation side, whether it's Navy or Air Force. Have we developed a couple generations of naval officers and Marine officers who haven't been held accountable to the multi-dimensions required of the full-up lethality warfight that's been discussed so much already here this morning? In other words, they've only had to think through a couple aspects of the problem, but not the full integrated problem. So we've talked about toughness and resiliency and how difficult that is to instill. How about changing that mindset when we've really been there almost since the end of the Cold War?
Yes, so I'll, with regard, we're struggling with a term. Well, we're trying to redefine the X, redefine the target. So we're thinking more about, that the target is not only the physical, but it's the virtual and the cognitive piece. And it really kind of ties into undervaluing the influence line of effort, or IW, that I would say that we learned in the CT realm, hopefully, that sometimes the influence line or the IW piece can be the main effort. If you look at the CT fight, probably some of the most powerful things we're doing is military information support operations, where we're trying to target audience to influence behaviors with regard to getting after the seed of why people lost souls join a lost cause. So I would say the IW piece of the CT fight, I would say as we move into great power competition, we can talk about lethality in high-end conflict, but we're trying to think creatively about those other domains and what SOF brings creatively to the virtual, the cognitive piece, and how we partner with 10th Fleet, or we partner with, with our submarine brothers to get in and do some things that will influence and will because I really think it's a long ball game. I don't think great power competition is about frontal conflict, even though we need to prepare. It's more about influence and how do we do that across multi-domain.
Yeah, I'm going to hop in on the surface side. Sir, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look in our surface community, we've gotten very good at air defense, and we've gotten very good at ballistic missile defense, but we have not, we've really gotten away from the offensive lethality piece from a surface ship standpoint, and I think that, I think ASW was also lesser valued in surface ships in the last many years, and I think that has changed dramatically. I mean, we've dramatically improved the number of ships that are out there with the Victor 15 suites. We're over half now, which is really an aggressive move for us. We've put a lot of money into it. But the long-range ship thing between ships and submarines for long-range missiles and faster and longer-range missiles is really a key priority for us right now, as is commonality. That's another piece. I think we all fought in our stovepipes. The air wing went off to fight ashore. The ships kind of protected the carrier. The submarines did their thing. And I think now we're realizing that we have got to do a lot better with our tactical integration and our warfare development centers. I think if you ask Admiral Miller what's happening up at Fallon with my surface warfare widdies and his widdies together briefing some of the most incredible warfighting tactics that I haven't seen in my whole career. Similarly, on the surface side, we're bringing out Maritime Strike Tomahawk missile, a dual-capable Tomahawk. We're bringing out Naval Strike Missile. This is a brand-new missile. We just awarded it last year. We want to deploy it this year. If we do that, we've got to have it be ready to manned, trained, and equipped to perform in theater, and we're going to try to do that. I don't think we've done that type of speed to fleet acquisition and fielding in my career. And so there's this confluence of things meeting people, and it capitalizes on the warfighting development centers, and we've just now, Admiral Brown can talk about their new warfighting development command that's adding probably one of the most important piece because it integrates all of the things we do together. So I really am excited about where we are going, and we are learning quickly, and we are catching up because we did let it go for a while. And I think, make no mistake, we are very good at what we can do today, but we're going to be much better because of this shift in mentality.
I could
I'll
add.
take a question from over on the right side here.
Can I add,
Go ahead.
I just want to add one piece to that answers, I think, another dimension of your question. And I think all the Navy component commanders, Admiral Aguilino, Admiral Fogo, Admiral Grady, are thinking about this, and it really is how we do rearm, resupply, and repair in a contested environment. So it is this logistics piece that you're really kind of talking about, how we're going to sustain the fight in a place that's not just going to be where we dominate. And so, we talk a lot about dynamic maneuver, but this is more kind of dynamic posture. So when you think about how we're posturing forces and how we're working with allies for access and some of the creative things we do with MSC and some of the full spectrum logistics pieces, that's going to be a big piece of everything that Admiral Boxall talked about.
Sir.
Yes, I have a recommendation going back to your question, Admiral Zortman. Back in the mid-'80s, I was very fortunate to go through department head school right after the Falklands War. And they had a Royal Navy lieutenant commander who was a PWO on one of their Type 21 frigates that was sunk during that war. That was the last war a Navy's ever had to fight in 3 dimensions over a sustained period of time. And what was fantastic about the 4 hours we spent with this man is he had 35 millimeter slides that he took throughout that entire war. And I would suggest that it might be good to reach out to the Royal Navy for their experiences and bring that back into SWAS because it was fantastic. The question.
Oh, go ahead.
The question I have is, after the sinking of the Chinook, there was a lot of effort put on by the Navy to fix torpedo defense. And I'm curious, do we think we've gotten after that Achilles heel?
Well, I do a lot of torpedo defense in my portfolio. So one of the key elements to torpedo defense is knowing where the bad guy is in the first place. And so we are very good at those types of things, and obviously unclassified for them. One of my concerns for ships and for submarines is, as we look at the adversary submarines, their threat is shifting from torpedoes to cruise missiles, very, very long ranges, and that's kind of in the great power side a threat that's, to me now something that they don't have to come in within very close range. They can now do it at very, very long range. So we've now again, put a premium on locating in the first place, ensuring that we know all those, where they're operating. So we've spent a lot of time in the last many years that Admiral Daly just talked about, playing defense, waiting for them to come to you, waiting for the missile to come, for the airplanes to come. This shift in mindset for defense is your best defense is a good offense. And the idea that we will go after the threats at range is something we haven't been able to do for a while, whether it be ships, submarines, or aircraft. And the adversaries are doing those things. And so we need to go after offensively to prevent being in a position where we try to build such a robust defense and go broke playing defense, when in fact we can significantly improve our own position through an aggressive offensive posture.
You know, our surface forces, we work up with them all the time. And we're bringing to bear the most sophisticated torpedo in the world. And one might think that it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but it is not. Our Arleigh Burke destroyers have a very good sensor suite, very good sonar, very good radars. They push us back further and further. They detect the incoming, and they actually have very good tactics, techniques, and procedures to counter it. So I think as far as the defensive piece, if it's always best to keep it at arm's length, but in the actual piece of actually being shot at, they're actually very, very good at what they do. And that comes from a lot of practice with us.
I'll tell you, with the integrated nature with which we fight, then bringing in the aviation side of that puzzle with H-60s and P-8s, and then how we train to that fight, I think it's definitely an area that has our attention and as it should, and we continue to evolve how we fight so that we're ready to win that in that environment.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Captain Yuri Sepp. I'm out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Joint Interoperability Test Command. Slightly above the level of what Admiral Boxall brought up about individual readiness, there's a concern in my organization about logistics support readiness in the event of enemy action, cyber action, physical action that will result in a significant loss of assets, whether entire communication suites or, God forbid, entire ships. Do you foresee any sort of logistics changes we should be anticipating in the near future, or are we good where we are, or do you see just tweaks?
Hey, good morning, Marine. Thanks for being here, and thanks for a great question. What you highlight is one of the most significant challenges. It's been suggested by the panel in terms of how you rearm, refuel, refit in forward locations. So as we look at the future operating environment, we expect that we're going to have significant challenges projecting and sustaining forces in forward locations. So we need to think a bit differently and are working actively on the project with the Navy about how we approach pre-positioning. What we want to have in place that we can benefit from sort of in early phases of a campaign. We're thinking about long-range, unmanned, autonomous connectors and distribution assets in order to move fuel and ordnance over contested operational ranges. And then we're thinking about how we apply different combinations of amphibious assets and other elements of the fleet in order to be able to benefit from their ability to move fuel and ordnance, and then tie into the embarked MAGTFs connectors, to kind of close the last tactical miles with the delivery of fuel and ordnance. We anticipate we're going to have to play three-card Monte constantly with where we seek to conduct our rearming, refueling, and refitting from. So it's going to be a very active game in order to make targeting challenging, but we also see value, operational value, and imposing costs on them, trying to chase where we're doing those activities and where we're generating combat power. So kind of to the broader point, it's a different operational game and different operational challenge, but we think there's some promising techniques and procedures, and we think that there's some promising technology that will help us get after that, but it's going to be a fight.
Hey, can I add, so one thing we're looking at that this may support your point is the vulnerability of the blue in protecting some of the things we take for granted in great power competition. So we're calling it identity management. A need to, increase CI, OPSEC, force protection, and then digital footprint in those, I would call, tail portions of the tooth. So we've got to really look hard at our vulnerabilities and our signature, our digital signature, and we, as a force writ large, I think those disciplines about hardening the blue and being able to harden the ability for asymmetric actions by peers with regard to those supporting elements of high-end warfare.
Yeah, I'm going to hop in from distributed maritime operations puts a premium on logistics. So if you're going to operate your forces like we do today and we're going to spread them out, it just makes sense that you've got to have more of those things to do that. But there's another side of this. One is your own vulnerabilities of force. And one of the things in the surface side is, we could keep putting all kinds of systems on every ship and make it, this impenetrable force, and that's going to be a very expensive force. Or we can go the other way and say we can put out a lot of unmanned systems out there and expect that you will take some casualties, but the network will prevail. And so I believe that there's two prongs. We got to get better today on the former model and I think we know that. How we get them, again, Admiral Daly's, one of the things that probably took a beating over the last couple decades was our logistics force and the recapitalization. However, it also presents an opportunity of doing things in a different way. We're pushing a lot in our unmanned programs, our large unmanned surface vessel program, our medium unmanned that's out operating today, the Sea Hunter that you see in the waterfront here in San Diego. And again, smaller platforms. We're going to put a new, very capable multi-mission frigate with vertical launch capability on a ship that's going to be about half of what it costs a destroyer to do out there today. Part of that is creating more platforms that can do those same things with long-range missiles that can reach the enemy in more places. And so therefore, if we lose some in the future, we have the ability to make it up with capacity as well.
Thank you,
You at the heart of all these things that these gentlemen are talking about is this idea of mission command. And it's something you have to have the ability to understand you're not going to be command and control through some higher headquarters. So the local commanders are going to have to self-organize, communicate with one another, develop superiority at the point of contact, and execute the mission in an environment where there's not going to be a lot of C2 coming from the HQ on land somewhere. So this idea of taking commander's intent, the mission, and locally organizing is kind of inherent to all these discussions.
So Daryl, that's a great lead into a question that your leaders in the community in how you identify, select, and enable commanders. There's a perception, I think, in some quarters that the force has become risk averse, that initiative that commanders need locally isn't necessarily present or being exercised in a way. I think it would be useful to hear from different people here. How are you as a community viewing that, and how are you getting at finding, developing, and enabling commanders to do the kind of training and demonstrate their ability to perform in those trying conditions that don't come from Central Command?
Yeah, I'll kick off just real quick to let others, because most people in this room know that's inherent in submarine force. Because we're not expected to communicate a lot. We're very much like special forces in that regard. And so we do have some enabling technologies that's improving that. But when I hear that commanders aren't being given the authority to actually operate as a commander, to your root question, it should be to everyone in this room and certainly at this table offensive. And because that is the nature of command, we select these folks to actually be in charge of these vessels and to empower them with the authority and responsibility to take that fight and deliver the actual effects and ordnance that they need to do. So I think you'll see that's a myth, what you just said. That's not happening. And if that's being espoused in some way, I don't see that in any of our communities.
It's interesting. You brought up Admiral Lockwood earlier, and I think he was, if I have my history right, Daryl, on submarine flag officers, he was famous for, if you will, calling the herd of multiple commanding officers that he didn't feel had the toughness and were risk adverse, and replacing them with those that did. I agree with Daryl 100%. Our entire leader development strategy has those conversations where we sit down with our 06 major commanders to our 05 commanders. And matter of fact, coming up here in 2 weeks, we're having 250 junior officers that are coming to San Diego, and we're having an exchange of ideas between junior and senior leaders. But it's where we have that opportunity to have those kind of discussions about what is valued. And to be honest with you, a lot of what's valued is we show that through our selection boards. And so getting those precepts right to say warfighting is and lethality is what we value, and then making sure that we're rewarding that by selecting those folks for command positions, and then making sure that they're prepared to win when they get into command.
Hi, Jeff Zuluwitz with Navy Times. Rear Admiral Boxall, this question's for you. You talk about the surface fleet returning to a culture of excellence. My question is, when is the rest of the fleet, when are the American taxpayers, when are the parents of these kids going to see proof of these reforms? Senator King at a hearing yesterday asked Admiral Davidson about this and said, where is the metrics? Where is the data? GAO reported a few months ago that sailors are still working 100-hour weeks out in Japan. You guys still have a senior quartermaster billet shortage, among other things. So when is everybody going to see some proof in the pudding, so to speak?
Okay.
Thanks.
First, you mixed a lot of different things in there, but first of all, the RROC, we've been very, very open as a Navy on the things we're doing in response to those, and we'll report those to the Hill, and we'll continue to do those. So I haven't seen the Senator's recent comments on that, but certainly we have a very tight communication path back to the Hill, and if he doesn't think we're doing well enough, then we need to get better at that. So we'll take that on. I'll pass that along. The other piece, you talked about some of the outcomes and the metrics and what we're using. First problem one is to figure out what you're going to change, and then when you change, is that making a difference? You brought up Manning, very tough problem. This is not something that generated today. You can't grow a senior chief tomorrow. Truth in advertising is that we were billeted and funded for about 98% manning in the surface fleet. So the billeting and the funding of the billets was not the problem. We do have some distribution issues so that was manpower in manning of actually getting the people where they need to be, and that's a very real problem that we're going to have for a little while, and every one of us up here is going to have to endure that. It will take years to rectify that. In a broad sense, we did a lot of work as a Navy, led by the VCNO and the Undersecretary of Defense, Undersecretary of the Navy, leading us every week in this readiness, this review in the RROC, that we have a very clear lines of accountability and that is continuing to work every day. That has not stopped. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take us some time to, we have to move money, we have to make changes, and then we have to just see what it works. So it will take time, but we do already have some metrics in the near term of things that we're doing and the points along the way that we are increasing the quality of the types of training that we're doing, the number of hours, the fidelity. We can show you those things, but it's going to take time. We got to buy more systems. We got to get higher fidelity trainers, and that's not going to happen overnight. So appreciate the question. We want to be as open and transparent about this as we can be, and we have our money's where our mouth is. As I said, we've got over $1 billion in these types of issues in the near term. They'll bear fruit here soon for us, I'm sure, to increase that.
Any encouraging metrics you can cite offhand?
I can't offhand. Again, man, train, equip, and those things are really not necessarily my lane, but we have them. I just don't have them personally, but I certainly can pass that along to the waterfront. We'll get those. Whatever ones that you need specifically, you can let us know.
I can add one piece to that. I can tell you that in the commander's update briefs that we have with Admiral Aguilino in the Pacific, there's not a ship or submarine that heads west that's not at the proper manning when it deploys. So we are green in manning before a unit gets underway. Now there's still shortages, and we have to manage that very carefully. But I can tell you the N1s of the world are under the thumb of our commanders to make sure that we are all up around from a manning perspective when a ship goes west.
Sorry, I didn't answer your one question about the actual the studies that have been done, because that was tasking direct from the Hill. We have done those studies on surface ships, for example. We've increased the number of folks that are going to be on destroyers. We've done in-port and underway work week reviews, And the result of that review means that we have a greater requirement for folks on destroyers. That's going to happen on submarines. It's happening on carriers. It's going to happen across the 4 deployed fleets. So those will have an impact. I mean, it won't happen overnight, but I can guarantee you that we will have more people on those ships than we had even before at a very high manning level. So while the denominator will change, we may actually go down in the percentage of people we have on board, but the requirement will have gone up. More to follow on that. Those would be the metrics you should challenge us on, and I think you'll be happy to see that we are moving in the direction that we've been directed.
Thank you.
Admirals, I'm a Cold War submarine skipper, fast attacks, and a great student of Jim Hornfisher. Reading him, his battleships were unable to dislodge the Japanese at 5,000 yards on Saipan. Could we do Saipan again today?
I don't want to answer all the questions.
Yeah, I think that's a question that isn't just about battleships shooting big 16-inch shells into defilade positions.
It's only 14-inch shells.
Well,
that's all right, Admiral.
But your question is valid because I think it's a question of an integrated fight that had a significant combat logistics part of it. It was combined arms of aviation from both carriers and from land-based. It was Draper Kaufman really inventing the SEALs as part of that.
Blowing holes through coral.
Right.
I haven't. Can we ever do that again?
So the question is, that in that particular thing, I think is could that level of force be brought to bear against a place like Saipan? I'll let each of the panelists, if they have an opinion on that. The other part of that was just mass. Hundreds of ships. And I think the answer in the hundreds of ships category would be no, not with the force we have today. With other capabilities, maybe. Over to the panel.
I might just hop on because amphibious operations are such an important component of the Marine Corps' contribution to the naval team. The first thing I would say, sir, is it's a different type of amphibious operation. So we want to be able to achieve, what we would describe as kind of all-domain dominance for the critical window of time that we need in order to be able to project force. So that's the application of the entire Navy team, the entire Marine Corps team, and frankly, other elements of the Joint Force are key players for our ability to be able to do that. So all domain dominance, the window of time that we seek to maneuver in, we have to be able to operate from greater ranges. There are some really important capabilities that contribute to our ability to do that, and then to operate with precision. So, clearing very large frontages and, being able to close the force to, really tight ranges are things that would be super challenging, maybe impossible in today's environment. But if we operate with precision, we extend the ranges that we're operating from. We're able to achieve kind of the integration across all domains that is necessary for us to own that battle space for the necessary period of time. We can project force across the joint team and across the naval services in order to be able to create a lodgment or to establish capability ashore. We're thinking that, hey, you establish that capability ashore, how do you reverse the thrust vector and then apply that capability in support of sea control? But we might also be thinking about sustained operations ashore, but a different type of amphibious operation than what we executed at Saipan. And I think it's a really important point for all of us to keep in mind.
I think we're down to maybe one last question. So,
Great, thank you all for being here. Megan Eckstein with USNI News. We've already heard a lot about sort of the training and certification periods before deployments being compressed, especially due to some maintenance challenges. So as y'all look to insert new capabilities such as the Naval Strike Missile and the Harpoon Missile, as you look to insert new, the CNO talked about conceptual agility this morning. As you look to sort of modernize warfare, how are you inserting that into the training and certification period without overburdening those sailors?
That's a good question. It's easy to oversubscribe ourselves. And, if we're not careful, we will bring too much on our for me, FRTP or FRTP process So we do have to kind of, at our level at this table, integrate that in a very deliberate and careful manner. And so I think our system allows for that latitude. I think it's built in that we can bring a new system online through mobile training teams, through SOVATs, through testing and processes, and things that we have in place through the existing infrastructures that bring those new technologies to bear are pretty well equipped to integrate in at a certain pace. So I think if we bring a new weapon system in, or a CRAM, or when you had a CWIS, that type of level of change, we can absorb that. What we couldn't do is some, wholesale change out. But I think a weapon system, a new missile system, the commonality of how we manage information on board, the look, form, fit, and function of our technology screens, allow the adaptation of new weapon systems and how we control those much easier than it was in the past. So the sailors are more, I think, able to actually bring a new system in because of the way we build the underpinning IT.
That's a fair criticism, Megan, but here's, there's two sides, again. You're going to have risk, right? There's risk by not having the new capability, and there's a risk of bringing that capability on at a pace that's too fast for the system, right? We want to find that right balance. But in the past, I think we have overstepped and waited till we had it perfect, till everything was in place and we put everything out there. And there's an opportunity cost to going slow. And we've not acknowledged the risk associated with that, whether it be in a shipbuilding program, an aviation program, or a new missile, whatever it is. We just say it's got to be perfect, it's got to be there, and we got to have everything in place. I think we've got to aggressively challenge ourselves. This is a much faster adapting world than we have lived in, and it's only going to get faster. And in this high-velocity environment, we are going to have to accept risks in some new places that we haven't in the past. I would argue that we should accept it in places where you're going faster.
Okay, now we'll take the last question, really.
Thank you very much, sir. Paul Zolja from Task and Purpose. This is for Admiral Green. Sir, there have been a number of high-profile cases of SOF personnel being accused or found guilty of professional or ethical violations. You had SEALs dismissed over drug use very recently. You've got SEALs currently under investigation on trial for murder charges. Head of SOCOM put forth a memo talking about ethical standards. I'm wondering what steps you're taking, sir, to get NSW off of the skyline, so to speak. And are these cases indicative of a larger cultural problem?
Okay, the purpose of this panel is lethality and readiness of the force. And so if there's a question in there about lethality and readiness of the force,
I would say that readiness of the force would include SEALs being ready to deploy and not being
Agreed. So I guess the question is readiness of the SEAL force in terms of training challenges. Is
Correct.
that okay?
Yeah, hey, that's a fair question. I appreciate you asking it. And it is something I'm looking at hard. I just commissioned, I had an 06 that came back from Iraq, CJIS certified commander, and I had him look 90 days at what we're doing in the schoolhouse, what we're not doing, what we're doing relative to leader development and hard ethical decisions, combat ethics, to see if we're addressing that through our interdeployment training cycle. So we are addressing it, and we are looking hard as a learning organization to self-assess, to see, are we assessing and selecting the right people? Are we holding them accountable to standards, honor, courage, commitment? So I would say we're on that. I just chartered a 90-day assessment, like I said, and I'm going to get the results from him, and we will address those. We're really looking at, how we integrate that continuum of leadership development and hard discussions. We've been at war for 17 years, and those are the things that we are looking. So we are on it. So I appreciate the question. It does affect readiness.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, thanks. Okay, I think we're getting to the end of the time. I'd like to thank the members of the panel. This is a tough business. They live at the crux of the stuff coming and the stuff we got today, and they're charged routinely with making sure the people and the equipment that's in the force is ready tomorrow, it's ready next week, and it's ready 18 months from now. So I'd like to ask for a hand for the panelists and the great answers.
On behalf of the Naval Institute and FCA, I'd like to thank the panel as well. This was a great conversation. For those who are not here today, you can watch this on YouTube. All of our panel discussions and speakers will be available on YouTube, on the Naval Institute YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and hear some parts of this, do so. If you want to tell your friends and colleagues who were not here that they can catch up on what's the content of the conference today and the next couple of days, they can do that as well. I've got a memento of thanks for all the panel members. Third edition of Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations, sort of the Bible of Tactics by Wayne Hughes and Bob Guerrier, just came out in 2018. So thank you again for your time and for your insights today, and I look forward to talking to you during the break time.
Hey, by the way, before this panel started, I snuck up here and changed Boxall's and my name tag, so you had to sit on the scene.
What submariners, man, what they'll do to you, right?
Well played. Well played.
Nice.